This is Collaborative Action Research for Effective Instructional Practices by Martens for c&t801. And we're going to be looking at what we are able to do with the Collaborative Action Research Plan in regards for strengthening or improving our instructional practices in our classroom. So our first step in this is to ask questions. What is it that we want to have happen? And continuing that questioning process until you get down into an unambiguous question, as is recommended, and something that's not too broad or would introduce too many variables, something concrete that we can say, okay, if this is what we want to have happen, this is how that can happen. And for mine, I said, I would want to do, what could we do to increase student achievement? And I realize that's a very broad question. I think it would have too many variables, and we would need to continue our why and how and what process, but it would be a good start. Our next step then, kind of getting down to identifying the problem and going through the questioning and making sure we have our teams formed. And that would be dependent upon the size of our school or our departments or grade level, how many teachers might be there. It could be homogeneous or heterogeneous depending on what your goals are and what you want to have happen. But once we know what we're doing, we know who's involved with it, then we can begin collecting the data. And the data collection is going to be very dependent on what your goal is and what questions you're trying to answer. And it might be that we could pull the data from existing sources already, or it might mean that we need to be collecting our data. And so that's really going to dictate perhaps the timeline of the process and kind of where we can go with that. Once we do have our data, our next step then obviously is to analyze the data and determine what it is telling us. And one interesting thing might be that once we get into it, we say, oh, well, maybe our questions aren't quite what they need to be. The data's not supporting it. Maybe you have to go back, and rather than looking at it as a linear process, it's much better to look at it as a recursive process. And at any stage of this, we might need to go back and maybe we need to reform the committees or groups that we're working with, or maybe we need to go back and tweak the questions. Maybe we need additional data. Maybe we have irrelevant data. And so all of that's going to play into that. Once we kind of have a better grasp on the entire process, we're going to determine our plan, and that's an action plan, not just a kind of look around plan. What are we going to be doing? And once we have that kind of set up, we can implement it. Then we're going to collect our data from our results. Again, change is needed. Maybe we put into place our instructional practices that we thought were going to change it, and we see nothing measurable. Well, we got to go back. Or, maybe we found out that in a small group study, it's had great impact. Let's try it in different types of classrooms or at different grade levels and that sort of stuff. Frequently, we would need to meet and reflect. Promptness is ideal because if it's not doing what we need it to do, we want to be able to change it in a timely manner so as to not waste our time. As far as instructional strategies go, we're going to analyze the issue, determine our strategy, implement our strategy, analyze results, and then reflect upon the process and kind of move on or return to a previous point as dictated. So in this scenario, just for this example, what instructional strategies effectively engage students in our classrooms? And we might be able to look at data, we might be able to do surveys of students, we might be able to observe each other. We could certainly survey administration and kind of get feedback from them. And then let's say just for our scenario, differentiation increases engagement, appealing to students and different learning types and activities, and that might help it. So then we would focus on using it. We would track our results. That would be necessary. And then, like I mentioned a little bit ago, frequent analysis, reflection, and then questioning. And that guides our decisions in our classrooms and as we come together to analyze everything. So overall, learning can look a lot of different ways, and we just want to be able to have our most effective professional development possible. I think a collaborative action research plan does something that some of the others really don't even begin to touch upon. And I don't think most professional development that we see today in schools comes from this collaborative action research. But when you do see the very successful studies that are reported in some of our readings or other coursework, then we see that, it's something that came from the teachers and from the school. It fits their cultural context. It is something very personal to them that they have a stake in. And those seem to be the really effective professional development examples that we frequently see. It's also broad enough that you can apply it whether you're looking at curriculum, student learning, teaching practice, the school as a whole, what you want to tackle, or even individually in a teacher's characteristics. So it can be very individualized. I also think some of the other plans that we've read about or learned about, such as like peer coaching and the Diaz Maggioli, I don't know if I said that right, model, like could kind of even come into this one just based on what the needs are. And I really like that. It's one that I think is really applicable and would work well with almost any question that fits the criteria, and you could kind of go on from there. Thank you for listening.